Hello and welcome to Amazing Grace Bible Study Fellowship today. We're in a continuing study of the book of Acts, and if this is your first time to hear this study, I might suggest that you go back and review some of the former videos on this that are archived on my website and also on my YouTube channel. Anyhow, we're in chapter 24. Before we get into that, just a quick recap of what happened in chapter 23. Paul, who this is all about, and his ministry, is arrested by the Romans and imprisoned in Jerusalem. In fact, they actually save him from probably what would have been certain death at the hands of Jews who wanted to kill him, who had vowed to do this. And they gathered together a contingent of 470 soldiers to guard this one man, to take him to the province's governor, a guy named Felix, to have him judged and determine what his disposition was going to be. And so that is what's going on here. And so we begin chapter 24, where Felix has Paul's accusers come first and make their accusations. In verse 1 it says, "And after 5 days Ananias the high priest descended with the elders and with a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. And when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, Seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence." Of course, he's talking about Felix. He's trying to butter him up. Here's what this amounts to. "We accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness." Of course, the fact of the business is they probably despised Felix. "Notwithstanding, that I be not further tedious unto thee, I pray thee that thou wouldest hear us of thy clemency a few words. For we have found this man a pestilent fellow." And that word pestilent means mischievous and disruptive, malevolent, and a mover of sedition among the Jews. A seditionist would be somebody who's trying to divide the Jews up and form some sort of a coalition against these elders and leaders of the Jews. Among all the Jews throughout the world. Well, obviously it's not throughout the world, as Paul has had his missionary journeys throughout Asia Minor and some of Europe, but otherwise that's as far as he's been. And nobody had been any further than that. "And a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes." And of course that is because Jesus was from Nazareth. And that's what Paul preached. Jesus Christ and him crucified and raised from the dead. "Who also hath gone about to profane the temple, whom we took and would have judged according to our law. But the chief captain Lysias came upon us and with great violence took him away out of our hands." Of course, none of this is true. Paul didn't profane the temple, and Lysias simply took Paul as a captive to protect him from these people. There's no violence involved in it. They were the ones that wanted to do violence to Paul. There was an interesting quote that I found today when I was reading some of the articles in my inbox made by the philosopher Schopenhauer. And it says that when the truth is first beheld, it's mocked. There's three phases of it. First, it's mocked, and then violence is done against it, and finally, it is accepted as being self-evident. And I would say that the truth of Paul's message, that they're in the violent phase right here, the second half, and have been really throughout the Acts, because the Jews had opposed Paul all the way through his ministry, and had, in many instances, wanted to do violence to him, and did do that to him. Verse 8, commanding his accusers to come unto thee, by examining of whom thyself mayest take knowledge of all these things, whereof we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, saying that these things were so. The majority. We had the majority against him. That settles it, right? Then Paul, after that the governor had beckoned unto him to speak, answered, forasmuch as I know that thou hast been of many years a judge unto this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself. In other words, he's saying, I'm happy to present my case in front of you because I know you're a good judge, a very experienced judge. Verse 11, because thou mayest understand that there are yet but 12 days since I went up to Jerusalem for to worship. I mean, I've been here a little more than a week, Judge. And they neither found me in the temple disputing with any man, neither raising up the people, neither in the synagogues, nor in the city. In other words, Paul's saying, there is no evidence of me doing any of the things that they're accusing me of. And you know, what's different about this? If you remember when the Jews requested that Pilate judge the Lord Jesus Christ after they had captured him, he didn't try to defend himself. He remained silent, which was a fulfillment of the prophecy of Isaiah chapter 53. But here Paul definitely steps up and defends himself as a Roman citizen, as he have every right to do, in front of a Roman judge. Actually, he's governor of the province, but he's also a judge. Neither can they prove the things whereof they now accuse me. But this I confess unto thee, that after the way which they call heresy, so worship I the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets, and have hope toward God, which they themselves also allow, that there shall be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust. And so Paul is saying that what they're saying about me is totally false. Paul has never spoken against the law that it's not righteous. In fact, he said that very thing, that the law is just and good in Romans chapter 7, his letter to the Romans. But on the other hand, he did say that the law, on many occasions, had been taken out of the way when it came to salvation. And this is probably what they're contending. But that didn't mean that he said the law was worthless. All he said is that the law, or keeping the law, observing the law, could not justify anyone. So in verse 15 he says, and have hope toward God, which they themselves also allow, that there shall be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust. And of course, that is going to occur at what is known as the Great White Throne Judgment of Revelation chapter 20, verse 11. And herein do I exercise myself to have always a conscience void of offense toward God and toward men. It's an interesting statement there, because the word conscience shows up about 20 times in Paul's epistles. And he always charges those that he's writing these letters to, which would be us in the world today, to not violate your conscience under any circumstances, for any reason. And he says he didn't do this because he had never offended God. The fact that he had offended some men is beside the point. Men are always going to be offended by what you say if it contradicts what they believe and teach. And they're going to mock it and try to do violence eventually against you for doing it. But the fact is, many of them eventually will come to believe what they persecuted you for as being self-evident, as Schopenhauer said. Verse 17, now after many years I came to bring alms to my nation and offerings. That's exactly what he did. He went up to Jerusalem to keep a feast. That's exactly why he went. And he said when he was among the Jews, he became a Jew. That means he kept the law. Verse 18 says, whereupon certain Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with multitude nor with tumult. I wasn't creating any big to-do. I didn't gather together a crowd of seditionists in there among me. In fact, he was there alone. Who ought to have been here before thee and object if they had aught against me. In other words, where are my accusers? He's saying. Where are they? You know, Roman law said that anyone who had been accused of anything had a right to be confronted by his accusers. That eventually became British common law, and then was written into our law in the Sixth Amendment of the Bill of Rights. Our governments are trashing that right and left with some of the so-called laws they're passing now, but it's still there on the paper, and we have every right to stand on it, just as Paul is standing on Roman law here as a Roman citizen. Verse 20, or else let these same here say, if they have found any evil doing in me, while I stood before the council. Except it be for this one voice, this lawyer, who has been chosen to accuse Paul because apparently he's a very articulate and eloquent speaker. But the people who actually are accusing him of doing what they said he did aren't there. Then I cried, standing among them, touching the resurrection of the dead, I am called and questioned by you this day. And when Felix heard these things, having more perfect knowledge of that way, he deferred them and said, when Lysias the chief captain shall come down, I will know the uttermost of this matter. So I'm going to talk to the officer that arrested you and see what he has to say. And he commanded a centurion to keep Paul and let him have liberty, and that he should forbid none of his acquaintance to minister or come unto him. And so here we have another wise official, another wise Roman official who chooses to do the right thing by Paul. And after certain days, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, which was a Jewess, he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. Of course. So I'm sure Paul recounted his own testimony of salvation, which any of us should do when we have a door of utterance, which he has given here. And then it says, as he reasoned of righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come, Felix trembled and answered, go thy way, for this time, when I have convenient season, I will call for thee. He hoped also that money should have been given him of Paul, that he might loose him, wherefore he sent for him the oftener and communed with him. And the word commune there means to give in a pecuniary fashion. We see Paul using the word communicate in his epistles, which means the same thing. But after 2 years, Porcius Festus came unto Felix's room, and Felix, willing to show the Jews a pleasure, left Paul bound. And so that ends chapter 24. And we begin chapter 25. Now when Festus was come into the province after 3 days, he ascended from Caesarea to Jerusalem. Then the high priest and the chief of the Jews informed him against Paul and besought him, and desired favor against him that he would send for him to Jerusalem, laying wait in the way to kill him. But Festus answered that Paul should be kept in Caesarea, and that he himself would depart shortly thither. So again, God's hand is in this. He's employing the Roman government to protect Paul from these Jews that want to kill him, because he's not through with Paul. God has a lot more to say through Paul in what we know as the post-Acts epistles. And so he uses the Romans, which a lot of people believe are just pure evil. And obviously they did a lot of evil to a lot of people in the expanse of the Roman Empire and conquering nations militarily. But in this case, God has them doing the right thing. Verse 5, let them therefore, said he, which among you are able, go down with me and accuse this man, if there be any wickedness in him. And when he had tarried among them more than 10 days, he went down unto Caesarea, and the next day, sitting on the judgment seat, commanded Paul to be brought. And when he was come, the Jews which came down from Jerusalem stood round about, and laid many and grievous complaints against Paul, which they could not prove. Where's the proof? While he answered for himself, neither against the law of the Jews, neither against the temple, nor yet against Caesar, have I offended anything at all. But Festus, willing to do the Jews a pleasure, answered Paul and said, wilt thou go up to Jerusalem, and there be judged of these things before me? Then said Paul, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be judged. To the Jews have I done no wrong, as they very well know. So what Paul does here is appeal to Caesar. And once a Roman citizen makes an appeal to Caesar himself in Rome, then officials like Felix and Festus have to send him to Rome. They have no choice under Roman law. Paul goes on to say, for if I be an offender or have committed anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. If I've done something wrong, so be it. Have me executed. But if there be none of these things whereof these accuse me, no man may deliver me unto them. I appeal unto Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, Hast thou appealed unto Caesar? Unto Caesar shalt thou go. And after certain days King Agrippa and Bernice came unto Caesarea to salute Festus, and when they had been there many days, Festus declared Paul's cause unto them, saying, There is a certain man left in bonds by Felix, about whom, when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and elders of the Jews informed me, desiring to have judgment against him. To whom I answered, It is not the manner of the Romans to deliver any man to die before that he which is accused have the accusers face to face, and have a license to answer for himself concerning the crime laid against him. Therefore, when they were come hither, without any delay on the morrow, I sat on the judgment seat and commanded the man to be brought forth, against whom, when the accusers stood up, they brought none accusation of such things as I supposed. In other words, he saw through their BS, through their fallacies and their false accusations, but had certain questions against him of their own superstition, and of one Jesus, which was dead, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. And because I doubted of such manner of questions, I asked him whether he would go to Jerusalem and there be judged of these matters. But when Paul had appealed to be reserved unto the hearing of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I might send him to Caesar. In other words, he's justifying what he's done here to the king, Agrippa. Herod Agrippa, that is. Then Agrippa said unto Festus, I would also hear the man myself tomorrow. Said he, Thou shalt hear him. And on the morrow, when Agrippa was come, and Bernice, with great pomp, and was entered into the place of hearing, with the chief captains and principal men of the city, at Festus' commandment, Paul was brought forth. And Festus said, King Agrippa, and all men which are here present with us, you see this man about whom all the multitude of the Jews have dealt with me, both at Jerusalem and also here, crying that he ought not to live any longer. And when I found that he had committed nothing worthy of death, and that he himself had appealed to Augustus, I have determined to send him, of whom I have no certain thing to write unto my Lord, wherefore I have brought him forth before you, and especially before thee, O King Agrippa, that after examination had I might have somewhat to write. For it seemeth to me unreasonable to send a prisoner, and not withal to signify the crimes laid against him. And so he passes on the mantle to Herod Agrippa, the Roman king in Jerusalem. And I'm going to stop the study right there for now, and we'll pick it up in chapter 26, the chapter in which Paul gives his testimony again before King Agrippa. Until then, I suggest that you go and partake of what I have on my website, agbsf.com. And if you've never read my book, 85 pages in the Bible, you can go on Amazon and there order a copy of it, or download the e-version of it. And so until next week, I bid you adieu, and may God richly bless you.